Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in Siege of the Atlas we're getting a brand new crafting system. In this video we're going to be breaking it down, seeing how it stacks up, and going over all the cool interactions it has. But first, if you enjoyed this style of video, it takes ages to make, so please like the video, and of course if you're not already, subscribe to the channel, would seriously help me out. But without further ado, let's get into it. So Eldritch Crafting, the new kid on the block, just how powerful is it? Well, let's see what it's up against. So there's currently 4 different types of endgame item types. There's Fractured, Synthesized, Influenced, and now Eldritch. Each of these are exclusive. You cannot interchange them, you cannot combine them, and overall they're kind of their own thing. They also interact with the other crafting systems in the game in different ways, such as, you know, fossils, essences, and rogue, and some of them play nice with these systems and some of them don't. We're going to be going over that interaction as well as how they stack up on their own right now. So first up, Fractured and Synthesized. So these in general are hyper endgame options for very wealthy players. Fractured items are ones that are pretty much used for mirror crafting or very specific crafting projects. Synthesized items are super duper niche, generally on a very high power level, but very expensive. So we're not going to talk too much about those. All you need to know about it is that you can have them, they're there, but most people don't really use them. Okay, Influenced, the easiest one to compare to Eldritch. Basically, its brother and its predecessor. Let's see how these two stack up and then get into all of the interesting tidbits about Eldritch. Okay, so Influenced, we know all about it. We know it has access to a ton of powerful mods. The question is, how powerful are those mods compared to the new Eldritch mods? Well, first of all, we need to consider one important fact. Eldritch can only be applied to helmets, gloves, body armors, and boots, whereas Influence, and by extension Synthesized and Fractured, can be applied to all different types of items. And that's definitely a very big point. So Eldritch is only going to be applied to 4 slots, meaning the other slots are either probably going to be occupied by traditional items or one of these 3 categories. But first, let's talk a little bit about how the two stack up against each other for the 4 slots that it actually can compare in. Okay, so a few of the Eldritch modifiers have been released, but without the full mod pool, we're not going to get the full picture. But just based off of what we have right now, a lot of the more powerful influence modifiers have found their way over to the Eldritch mod pool. For example, on gloves, you can get the conversion modifier for all elements, so physical to fire, physical to cold, and physical to anything. That is present on Eldritch as well as Influence. You also have damage over time multiplier, also present on Eldritch as well as Influence. They're the same modifier, you can get it on both. Pretty damn interesting. In some cases, we have seen a weakening of some mods, but they are still present on the Eldritch mod pool as well. For example, on chest pieces, you can get 30% increased aura effect, but on Eldritch, it seems you can only get 30%, for example, increased hatred effect. So a lot more specific, but potentially on a similar power level. We'll just have to see how that pans out. Both of them do, however, have their own very powerful specific mods. For example, Influence has the +1 power charge helmet mod. I imagine that's probably not going to be present on Eldritch, but Eldritch has +1 rage on attack hit on gloves. But Influence doesn't have that. Okay, so the point here is that the generic mods are probably going to be reasonably similar in terms of power. Dot multi and stuff like that. It's probably going to be on the same power level on both influence pools, but then they'll have their own specific strengths. Whether that's friendly charge on hit for influence, the 7-link helmets for influence, or the new pinnacle boss mods on Eldritch. Overall, they'll have their strengths and weaknesses, but in general, I would say right now, from what we can see, that the power is comparable. 2 influence modifiers is probably roughly equal to 2 Eldritch modifiers, and this video is going to kind of work around that basis. Okay, let's take a look at the total amount of mods and flexibility you can get on both of these item types. So influenced items have their implicit of the item. So for example, if you're using a ritual helmet, you can have like a blizzard crown implicit, and then they have 6 additional modifiers, 3 prefixes, 3 suffixes. You can have up to 6 influence modifiers, but most players generally have 2 influence modifiers on their items, and 3 if they're kind of really investing into crafting the item. That's generally where it stops. Very rarely do you see 4 or 5 influence modifiers. It's just generally not very realistic or even very effective. So 2 to 3. So that kind of puts it in line with the amount of Eldritch modifiers you're probably going to see on most items as well. So pretty damn interesting. Okay, let's take a look at the nuances though. So they have a similar amount of influence modifiers available to them at a similar amount of power. Seemingly, right now, that's what we can see. Where does the difference lie? Well, it lies in where these influence modifiers exist on the item. So on influence modifiers, the Shaper, the Conquurors, all that sort of stuff like that, we see the influence mods have to exist on the 6 modifiers which take up the bulk of the mods of the item. So 3 prefixes and the 3 suffixes. And you have to kind of juggle those different modifiers with the core mod pool, and it can get quite messy. And it also means you're excluding a lot of the really cool mods that come from stuff like fossils, essences, and naturally occurring drops. So stuff like horror essences on the helmet, abyssal sockets on the fossils, these are incredibly difficult to work in with influence modifiers as you're competing for 6 mod slots, which everything is kind of clashing against. So you've got the standard mod pool, an exclusive mod pool from stuff like fossils, and the influence mod pool all smashing together. You don't have a whole lot of room, and it's incredibly difficult to juggle all those modifiers together. In addition to that, the actual crafting tools available are very rigid. You're not allowed to use stuff like harvest on influenced items, and you're also pretty much forced to use an Awakener Orb due to the existence of the different influence modifiers' low weightings. If you want something like Tailwind and Elusive, you're not generally going to get them both together unless you use an Awakener Orb, or you kind of cheese something with Harvest Reforges, which is in most cases possible, but overall it is quite a pain. There's a ton of other issues with influence, but we're not going to get into any of those in this video because we'll be here for a while. Okay, enter Eldritch. The way it varies in Eldritch is that those 2 influence modifiers you have at your disposal are completely separate from the 6 modifiers on the actual core item. However, this flexibility comes at the cost of your implicit. So if you're using a ritual helmet, like I mentioned, the Blizzard Crown, you will lose that when converting that to an Eldritch item, meaning you do lose some power and some potential. All the ritual bases are out. A lot of other really powerful bases, like heist bases, are out. But overall, you do get a lot of flexibility from moving the influence modifiers off the core 6 to the top. Alright, let's talk about the advantages that this actually affords you though, because this is really where Eldritch comes into its own. So by separating the influence mods from the core mods, you achieve absolute safety of your item. Okay, so previously on influence items, you'd have to awaken your 2 influence modifiers together. Most likely they'd both have to be prefixes and suffixes, and you'd have to like mess around with a bench and all sorts of crazy stuff to kind of make sure they don't get rolled over. With Eldritch, you roll your 2 mods, you're done. Then you can roll the other 6 mods with any other traditional means of crafting you want. Absolutely far more easy, far more deterministic, incredibly safe. You cannot brick your 2 influence modifiers once you have them, unless you roll over them with more influenced material. Okay, that's pretty damn cool. Very, very powerful, and it's definitely going to be really, really going to afford you a lot of flexibility, and it's going to make actually crafting feel like a journey instead of a casino, which is pretty damn good. Okay, it does come at the cost of a little bit of power, and you can't get more than 2 of these things, but we're seeing the potential here. The power level of the 2 is similar, and the ease of actually crafting on these Eldritch bases is a lot better. Well, let's take a little bit more here. So we're talking about the actual amount of mods you can have on an item now. So let's say you have the full 6 modifiers on your influenced item, and you have a really good implicit. You've got like a Blizzard Crown or something like that. Well, on your Eldritch item, you have your 2 influence modifiers and you have 6 core mods as well. And it's going to be way easier to roll. Well, now you have 1 extra mod on those 4 slots, giving you a total of 4 extra mods, and that's almost as much as another item, which is pretty damn insane. Okay, but this isn't even a fair comparison, because influence modifiers, influence items, generally you have to kind of take advantage of a lot of really janky crafting techniques, and you don't end up with the exact result you want. So you'll awaken orb your 2 items together, and maybe sometimes a lot of players will just take the 4 modifiers that comes with the awaken orb, or just craft 1 extra one on. So whenever you craft a mod, generally you're losing about half the power of a full T1 mod. So you know, you're starting to look at actually not having the 7 mods. You've probably got about 6.5 or even 5.5 mods. So now you're starting to understand the full power and the full potential of Eldritch, because crafting a 6 mod generic normal item, or having one already and then applying the Eldritch Ichors and Embers to it, is infinitely easier than making an influenced item from the ground up. And you know, it's pretty damn powerful. Okay, I think I've explained the potential of Eldritch fairly sufficiently versus influenced, and all it's going to come down to is if their mod pool is unique enough and powerful enough to make it worth your time to use an Eldritch mod pool over an influenced one. That's all it's going to come down to, but the mechanic of Eldritch is far more powerful than influenced unless you need a specific base type like a ritual base. Okay, let's move on to the actual system itself now, and how it functions, and how you're probably going to want to use it to get the most power and the most gains out of the Eldritch system. Okay, let's start out with the actual system itself. So there's 2 different influence types, and you can have one of each on every item, giving us those 2 influence mods we were talking about. Okay, well, when you're applying them, there's 6 different tiers of those modifiers. There's T1 through 6. These don't seem to have any ranges, and they seem to be fully deterministic in terms of actually acquiring them. So overall, there's 4 different item types. Each 4 of those different item types are going to have their own mod pools. There'll be a mod pool for Exarch and for Eater, for helmets, for gloves, for boots, for chests. That's how it's going to be. Now, the first observation I want to point out here is that these mod pools are probably going to be incredibly massive. Every single character that uses these is going to have some potential mod which will appeal to them, meaning there's going to be an absolutely humongous amount of mods which can roll from these Embers and Ichors. So if you think about it, just off the top of my head, there's probably going to need to be some form of summoner mod, attack-based mod, bow mod, you know, caster mod, you know, dot mod, you know, all sorts of these things. There's going to need to be some potential to have all of these available and have something enticing for everybody. So definitely going to be quite a lot. In addition to that, there's no prefixes and no suffixes to these modifiers. So that further amplifies just how big this mod pool is going to be. Okay, well, what effect does this have on the crafting process? So let's say that your T1 Ember costs 1 Chaos Orb each, and you only want 1 modifier from the pool, and there's 100 Exarch mods in that pool for helmets. Well, you're going to need to spend 100 Chaos Orbs worth of Embers on average to get the modifier you want. And then an additional 100 Ichors on the Eater kind of modifier that you want. That's 200 Chaos for 1 item. Okay. Well, I think 1C for a T1 Ichor might be a little expensive, but it's certainly not going to be too expensive for the T4 counterpart. So let's quickly go over that. T1 Ichors are said to drop from anywhere, meaning they'll be plentiful, they'll probably cost about an alchemy orb, and anyone can probably just slam 100 of them into their item without too much trouble. T2 and T3 are said to come from influence content, meaning my guess would probably be these will be available to mappers, meaning you're probably going to be able to buy these in bulk as well. I imagine the T3 Ember is probably going to cost somewhere between 2 to 5C if I had to guess. But it could cost more than that, could cost less than that. But if it's available to mappers, generally, there's going to be a lot to play around with, and there's going to be a lot around. Alright, T4, which is the highest tier of rollable mod you can get. These only drop off pinnacle boss content. The Exarch and the Eater. These are going to be very, very difficult to acquire. So let's take our example from earlier. You have 1 mod in 100 mods that you want to roll with your T4 Ember or Ichor. Well, let's take a look at how that's going to work out. Let's say that they're about 50C each, and I think that that's probably a reasonable price given that they're probably 100% drop rate, and the Eater and the Exarch is probably gonna be pretty heavily farmed. Maybe they're gonna be a bit cheaper than that, but let's just say 50C. Okay, 50 times 100. Oh man, that's a lot of currency just there to get the 1 mod you want. And then you want to get the other T4 mod? Okay, that's going to be a lot of currency to roll that. So either these endgame bosses need to drop multiple T4 Embers and Ichors, or they need to be acquired from somewhere else, or you're going to have to adjust your strategy or keep your fingers crossed there isn't that many mods in the pool. But I have a sneaking suspicion there's going to be a lot of mods in this pool. Okay, let's talk a little bit about strategy here then. Okay, so you have multiple different options when trying to create your different Eldritch items. So you can either start with a very powerful item, like a big energy shield chest, like a 6-mod energy shield chest, and you want to slap some Exarch and Eaters. So the first option you have is which tier of Ichor and Ember do you want to go with? Well, okay, let's take a look at how much there is of an actual difference. So let's say you were crafting up some gloves, you have some insane gloves, and you want to have some cold damage over time multiplier on them. Well, you're going to roll some T3 Ichors, and you're going to get 18% cold damage over time multiplier. Well, what's the difference right now between T3 and T4? Well, T4 is actually only 19% cold damage over time multiplier. There's a 1% difference. So you can manipulate the cost of rolling these things based on your budget, which is incredibly impactful and very, very important. And you know, if you want to like really get budget, you can go all the way down to tier 1. That's got a lot more of a penalty associated with it, but you could in theory do that, with the T4s being reserved for the really, really big energy crafting moguls, if you will. Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, we have that option, but there's also another option. So of course, if you have your perfect 6-mod item and you're like, oh yeah, let's go for some Ichors and Embers, and you don't want to shell out the cash, well, we can kind of go down another route. There's probably going to be an economy around players rolling T4 Embers and Ichors on very popular base types to acquire certain modifiers, and then, you know, selling like multiple modifiers. So while you want 1 mod, that guy rolling the bases probably can sell 20 of the 100 mods and then, you know, make a bunch of money. Meaning you can buy your base off that guy and then just apply the other Eater or Ember or Eater or Eka, whatever, influence that you want to the item, and then you're golden, basically cutting your cost in half. For the most part. So overall, you can kind of see how this might all come together. You could buy a T4 mod one, put a T3 version of the other one on, and then you've got a pretty damn solid item, and then you just have to craft it up using some of the methods we're going to talk about here in a second. So overall, it's probably going to be a lot more affordable, assuming that the mod pool isn't truly monstrous than other kind of crafting methods. So pretty damn good there. Okay, let's say you've got that big crafting energy though. You want to go for the big items, the Maven Orb level crafts. Well, let's get into what that might look like here. So it's going to be very expensive, I imagine, to craft a high level Eldritch item. Okay, so we've got T1, 2, 3, and 4 of the currencies, but T5 and 6 also exist, and they're only acquirable by the use of an Orb of Conflict. So Orbs of Conflict drop from Maven Invitations and Maven. I imagine they're probably going to cost anywhere between 2 to 3 Exalts. So the way they work is very similar to a Maven Orb. They're going to take either one Exarch or one Eater modifier and upgrade it 1 tier and downgrade the other one. So let's say that you've got one modifier you really want, a T4 Ember modifier, and you slam on an Orb of Conflict and it upgrades it to T5. That's what you want. It's a 50-50, and you have to take it twice. Well, okay, that's not too bad. It's basically Maven Orb 2.0. But the question is, how hard was it to roll that T4 modifier? Did you roll it yourself on your item? Well, if you just use 100 Embers and there were 50 C each, well, you just lost, you know, however many thousands of chaos that is. But if you bought a base of some guy for 50C and then threw an Orb of Conflict at it, then okay, that's a lot more easy to recover, and it's definitely a lot more palatable. So basically, what I'm getting at here is in the absolute endgame crafting scenario, most likely when you're using anything to do with Orbs of Conflict, or even rolling anything to do with T4 Ichors or Embers, you're probably going to have the base here first, roll that with the implicits, and then craft it later on. I don't imagine the reverse is going to be very efficient or very effective, as these materials are probably going to be very expensive, and you need to churn through these things like candy. Overall, I expect that on the low end, you're probably going to find some sick items. Basically, any sort of item that you find, it's probably fine to throw, you know, 100 or so T1, 2, or 3 Ichors or Embers at it. But as soon as you hit T4 level power, you're going to have to start with the base first and put the influences on first, or the Eldritch mods on first, and then you kind of move forward and craft your item. Okay, things that further support this kind of theory is the existence of Eldritch metacrafting. So Eldritch metacrafting is here in the form of Eldritch Chaos, Exalt, and Annulment Orbs, affording you some form of deterministic availability of crafting on your Eldritch items, but only if there is already Eldritch modifiers on it, meaning it kind of means you want to have that base type locked in, you want to have your modifiers locked in, and then you want to use the meta crafting currencies on it afterwards. However, I don't think these are all too impressive. The functionality here already exists in the game in one way or another. The Exalted Orb is pretty much going to be satisfied by prefix to suffix or suffix to prefix on bestiary. Sure, it does probably have some pretty unique applications in terms of what you could do with blocking certain modifiers using the bench and all sorts of stuff like that, but I don't imagine that these are going to be too insane unless someone comes up with some super niche, very specific crafting strategies for them. Just slamming on a random modifier, even if it is a prefix or a suffix, isn't that powerful unless you have some sort of way to force a modifier. Similarly with Chaos Orbs, this is already able to be achieved but on a higher level with Harvest and Reforging, and then Annulment Orbs is probably one of the more powerful ones, kind of ripping a mod off, specifically prefix or suffix, could be quite powerful. It means you won't have to use the metacrafting modifier, which could be quite good, but again, in a lot of cases, this is easily achieved using the prefix to suffix and suffix to prefix using bestiary. So overall, I don't imagine these are going to be too impactful from my current knowledge of crafting, but it's possible they will be when some really crazy crafting moguls get their hands on them and come up with some very specific use cases where they are very useful and very strong. Okay, so now that we've broken down the actual currency itself, let's see how it interacts with the current systems in the game and some of the abuse cases which could be incredibly powerful with not having to worry about pesky influence modifiers on our 6 core modifiers. Alright, let's dive in. First of which is the pure freedom of being able to use these different systems. So stuff like fossils, essences, rogue, harvest, basic crafting, they're all on the table here. Previously, influence items like Shaper, Conquror, they have incredibly low weights. So you're pretty much an absolute madman for trying to roll anything with essences on influence items. So if you're trying to roll like boots, get an essence mod on boots, and you're trying to roll that with Tailwind, and you haven't already awakened, it's like just an absolute living nightmare. It's just not very viable. Fossils have a bit of a better time. You can block modifier pools, you can enhance others, but it's still very difficult, very annoying to roll with influence, and it's definitely overall not a very fun experience, and it's very, very expensive. Okay, enter Eldritch. How does that interact with all these systems? Well, let's get started. So, let's go with a bit of an example here. So let's assume you've got your base is set up, you're ready to go, and you've got a base with 2 of the very, very desirable mods that you want. Let's say you got a chess piece, it's got a T4 Exarch mod and a T3 Eater mod, and you've kind of acquired that. It wasn't too expensive. You bought the T4 off another player, the exact one you want on the base you want, and then you rolled the T3 one using some pretty cheap Ichors or Embers, and now you've got your item. Okay, it's pretty high power level. Those are already on the level of Awakened or Robbed influence modifiers. They're already there, they're locked in. Now the well is your oyster. How are you going to craft this thing, and what kind of potential do you have available to you? Well. First up, fossils. So fossils afford you some crazy weighted crafts. You can get some really nice items. Ask anyone that's crafted Stygian Vices, but you can get some very high try-resist, T1 life kind of scenario stuff on top of your already existing 2 influence modifiers. Anything you can get is absolute gravy. If you can get a 6 mod item, 6 perfect mods, and an 8 and the 2 Eldritch mods, insane. So overall, fossils are going to be very good. They're probably going to be the choice for a lot of people trying to craft energy shield gear, which synergizes insanely well with Eldritch mods. You can have the 3 energy shield prefixes, energy shield suffix, and then the 2 influence modifiers. Oh my god, what an overpowered sandwich of mods that's going to be. But the real power here comes from Abyssal Sockets. I think that these are going to be incredibly strong in the new expansion, and I have no doubt some people are going to be rocking Eldritch items with Abyssal Sockets on them. Namely, the helmet, the gloves, and the boots. An Abyssal Socket is generally anywhere between 4 to 6% more damage on top of giving you some survivability and utility. So Abyssal Sockets are going to be probably pretty in demand. The way you acquire these is by using a hollow fossil in a resonator, either by itself or alongside other fossils to get the desired mods you want, and that doesn't mess with your influence modifiers at all. Completely insane. We saw this used heavily when synthesized bases are involved, and that's only going to be even more prevalent with the new Eldritch modifiers. Really, really good. Okay, next up, we have some big potential from Essence. Not only is it just a really good base crafting system, acquire any T1 mod you want of your choice, well, pretty much, T1 attributes and all sorts of stuff like this, very easily acquirable alongside Eldritch modifiers now. Big win. Int stackers rejoice, and deck stackers, but overall, The real potential here comes from the corrupted essences, stuff like horror essences on helmet, giving you 30% more elemental damage, potentially adding up to a scenario in which you can get multiple kind of modifiers from the Eldritch pool, which enhance socketed gems on helmets, as well as the essence modifier, also enhancing it, and it's very easy to acquire, meaning we could see a crazy convergence of crafting systems there to create insane power. Very, very interesting, and potentially going to have quite a lot of power involved with essences as well. Next up, we have the kind of more vanilla crafting systems. We have ROG, which is incredibly deterministic. You can craft some insane 6-mod perfect items, all T1 from ROG. But in the previous system, because you couldn't use Shape or Conqueror influence on them, they were just worthless because they didn't have any of those insane mods. Well, now you can probably chuck on two of the T3 mods fairly cheap, fairly reasonably, get the exact ones you want on your ROG item. You get an 8-mod item. Absolutely crazy. Going to be a lot of value in ROG early on, crafting up some energy shield chests, some life chests, maybe some crazy helmets, some boots, 30% MS, 35% MS, triple res, life, 2 Eldritch modifiers. I think so. All right, moving on, Harvest. Okay, Harvest is a bit of an interesting one though, because we don't know if you're going to be able to use it to its full extent on Eldritch influenced items yet. We're not 100% sure, but I would assume that it probably is at the level of either the Conquror influence stuff or on the full power level, meaning you're going to be able to craft and reforge these items at your leisure to get a very, very good item of your choice. So overall, you can do Reforge Speed on your gloves, which could be really, really good, and get some attack speed on there. You can do Reforge Life and get some pretty insane results as well. Overall, I think Harvest is going to be pretty damn good, and I expect people to be using that on their Eldritch bases, which already exist. So, if you have a T4 and a T3 mod one, and you're going to go in there with some Harvest, Reforge Defense on your Energy Shield base, you could be in for some pretty good results. All right. Basic crafting. Okay, so this is something that has existed in the game for as long as it's been out, but has seen pretty much it's been fallen by the wayside. So, building up an item using alterations and, kind of building up step by step could definitely see a bit of a resurgence here. Even Alk Scouring could come back and be, pretty powerful. People already do use that on some of the more basic items, kind of like stitching devices and stuff like that. It's definitely open. But the real thing I want to talk about here is natural drops. Finally, there is some reason to pick up natural items. Okay, well, what are we talking about here? Well, obviously on the most basic level, we have our natural items. We have like chest pieces, helmets and boots and stuff like that. Those aren't completely worthless right now. If you loot an insane chest piece, well, someone might want it and throw some Ichors on Embers at it. Very, very good. Maybe you want to be picking up those, ideally, and selling them. But overall, I think it's probably still going to be a crafter's game in terms of that side of things. Where the power really comes in is going to be the natural drops. The natural drops are going to be stuff like delve mods, incursion mods, and all that kind of stuff like that. So we're talking like +1 Spectre chests from delve. We're talking, the chill gloves from incursion. We're also talking about the conversion gloves from incursion. Big potential power. In addition to that, we also have the base like grasping mail, which you can trade 60 breach rings in for an item with an exclusive mod pool on the level of S tier influence modifiers, which previously didn't play well with the influence system in the place. But with Eldritch mods, it plays very well. So we could see some grasping mail text coming out, and that could potentially be something to look into. Very, very powerful there. Overall, all the usual candidates are available to us for our secondary crafting methods in terms of bestiary, benchcrafts, harvest, and unveiling. That's all there, all potentially usable with our Eldritch mods. And the cool thing is, they're all protected by default. You cannot roll over your implicits, and they're going to make it way easier to kind of craft the item of your dreams, and overall it should be a much, much smoother experience. Let me sum it up for you guys and we'll finish up the video. Eldritch Crafting affords you a similar amount of power to influence. It's probably going to have its own perks, and the only thing that brings it a little bit down is that it eats up your implicit. Assuming it has a powerful suite of mods on the par with influence, I see no reason why it isn't superior and why you want to get your feet wet with the new system. It's very easy to pick up. It's very, very friendly with all the other crafting systems, and there's some big potential here. So hope you guys have enjoyed this video and you're as hyped as I am about the new league. And with all that said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Next video is going to be on mapping, so better be prepared. Until next time, cheers.